haven't lost hope. I haven't lost faith. Things are hard. I feel heartbreak. I feel sadness. And the other thing about tenderness I want to really communicate is like tenderness is not like good or bad. Tenderness actually helps us not be numb.
Mm.
Tenderness helps us not check out. Tenderness helps us hold the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. And if we are going to transform education, we have to be with the pain and suffering too and really see it and really feel it. And that's hard. But if we don't do that, we're just going to keep putting whipped cream on shit.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that's dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season is devoted to the power of empathy in education. Meet 12 visionary leaders from the Transformative Educational Leadership Fellowship Program and learn how they are bringing meaningful change to their schools. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Meena Srinivasan, a contemplative leader, speaker, and author, a visionary edupreneur dedicated to integrating mindfulness, social and emotional learning, and belonging in education. As the founding executive director of Transformative Educational Leadership and a former school administrator and classroom teacher, Meena has spent her career shaping a more compassionate and equity-centered future for educators and students. She is the author of SEL Every Day and serves on the editorial board of the SEL Journal while also teaching SEL foundations at UC Berkeley. Her TED Talk on Tenderness is one of the most popular TEDx talks of 2024, sparking a global conversation on the power of tenderness in leadership and life. And recognized as one of Mindful Magazine's 10 Powerful Women of the Mindfulness Movement, her insights on mindful leadership have also been featured in Educational Leadership magazine. Outside her professional work, Meena has spent over 25 years immersed in yoga and meditation. An ordained Zen Buddhist since 2010, she received the Lamp Transmission in March 2025 and serves on the board of the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. This season, I'm exploring the power of empathy in education, and I've invited Meena to kick off this special series because that's precisely what she practices and exemplifies. Welcome to the show, Meena.
Oh, Anita, it's so wonderful to just be in conversation with you and get to hang out. And I love how we ended up being matchy poo today.
Yes, by design. You came on and I was like, what
Yeah.
does your quote say? So do you mind letting us know and reading it out loud for those who are
Yeah,
listening to
sure.
audio?
It is hate is too great a burden to bear, and it's from Dr. King, who is
Right. And so
yeah.
inspired by your t-shirt, I went out to get my later hater. So we're in uniform on this call. So that's the bio. And the bio is beautiful and there's so much to unpack. But I wonder if you might share something of personal nature about you that you think will fill in some of the blanks, fill in some color on who you are besides the bio, to
Yeah.
explain what you're all about and what you're passionate about.
Yeah. Well, I think what I'm passionate about at the core is um melting the sense of separation from others in all life. I mean, for me, that's why I've been drawn to tenderness because I feel like it is a somatic experience and this felt sense of dissolving, the sense of separation. And I feel like so much of our suffering in the world comes from feeling isolated, feeling separate. I mean, in my spiritual lineage in Buddhism, one of the great insights we hope to cultivate is the insight of interbeing, which is this sense that nothing exists independently, right? And we are all a product of infinite causes and conditions. And um, so much of our suffering in the world is because of dualism, the separation of mind and body, the separation of like subject object. And so for me at the core, when I think about what is my like life mission, what animates Me, what am I deeply committed to? It is helping to create the conditions to melt that dualism that causes so much suffering in our world, internally and externally.
I love that. And this is it's such a powerful dotted line back to something that you said in your TEDx. We're going to have this in the show notes. It's a must watch, over 2 million views already. I rewatched it again knowing that we were going to have this conversation and was struck by what you wrote on a retreat in 2012. So your quote is, "My deepest aspiration is to grow my heart as wide as the world, cultivate boundless love, and release all that is not love and generosity from my heart." And I wonder, so you've already given a sense of what animates you today. It's not far from what animated you a dozen years ago, but I wonder if you could make the connection about your mission in life and what led you to study and uplift tenderness.
Yeah. Oh gosh, such an interesting question, and I'm in this ongoing journey. So, a lot of it grew out of the work with Transformative Educational Leadership with TEL, where we have connected, and so many other, beloveds now in our life have connected. And the core of TEL is really, um, it's about beloved community and really trying to create the conditions of beloved community within our fellowship, but also that all of our leaders become architects of beloved community. And the more you study beloved community, there is this emphasis on compassion and radical love. And those are my North Stars. But at times, compassion can feel like a lot and it can get very analytical and it's like alleviating suffering. Well,
Mm.
in order to alleviate suffering, you need to understand the other person's suffering. You need to have the capacity to alleviate their suffering. And the same thing with radical love, it can feel very abstract. So these concepts like compassion and radical love for me, sometimes they felt like stars on the horizon, beautiful, but out of reach in my day to day. But tenderness for me felt immediate, accessible, something I could feel in my body. And I feel like it shows up in the little things. It's almost like the missing link when we think about radical love or compassion. I feel like tenderness is an important, it's like the bridge. It's the bridge to get there. And I had the great good fortune of asking Thupten Jinpa, who is a longtime principal translator of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, about compassion, because that's his thing is compassion. And he said, or about tenderness. And he said that tenderness is the tonal quality we cultivate in compassion meditation. So it really is the um, the feeling tone, the somatic experience that is required of compassion. And I think, for me, this exploration of tenderness, there are two stories that really kind of that it was like the turning point and where I knew. Oh my gosh, this is what I'm being called to maybe for the rest of my life. I don't know. Um, I have been doing a lot of work around bridging, and at the time was writing a proposal for a conference around leading for belonging and being a bridge builder. My father's a bridge engineer, and I often think of myself as another kind of bridge builder, kind of the art of bridging. And I've even taken his engineering principles and use them to guide, how can we bridge differences? And as I was doing that, at the same time, one of my best friends was visiting, and I was talking to her about compassion and bridging and radical love. And I was like, but you know what's actually alive in my personal life and my contemplative practice, and also being a newer mother, I have a young child, is I'm becoming more intimate with this quality of tenderness. And tenderness can feel elusive. It's, if you go to Google Scholar, you Google Scholar tenderness, almost all the reference have to do with meat tenderizers or physical pain. And it's a term we use a lot. And I think it is vital to the survival of the human species. But it's not something that um, there is actually like a conceptual model for that we actually really know what it is. And that's part of the beauty about it. But my best friend, who's an academic, was visiting. She like led me through the kind of exercise you probably lead your doctoral students through, you know. And um, and what we landed on is what was really alive in me and my core was tenderness, but not necessarily even like this whole exploration. It was sort of like I'm a really intuitive person. I don't make plans for my life. I really just trust in the unfolding and kind of surrendered in a way. And it's like this unexplainable, like I couldn't not ignore it. Like girl, like you're being called, like you got to figure this. And when that happens for me, I don't know. I just listen. I listen. It's sort of the same voice that I woke up in the middle of the night when I was 25. It's like, you need to move to India. And I'm like, all right, I'm moving to India, you know, or you need to move to San Diego. Like I have these big turning points in my life that are totally not logical, that are completely like the universe is speaking through me to me. And so I kind of really started to have my own living lab around what tenderness is. Now, just as I'm intuitive, I'm also strategic. And I know, you know, while I'm super grateful to have a direct connection with my own indigenous wisdom stream where tenderness is alive, when I think of like the mother goddess or the divine mother in my Hindu spiritual tradition, I know in the West that for anything to be taken seriously, you need to have some scientific background. So, literally in a meditation, when I was at the in the early stages, like pre even like writing the TED Talk or anything, I was meditating, and my friend, I wouldn't even say he was my friend at that point, but a researcher that I had met a couple years, not a couple, a while ago, James Floman came to me, and James is an emotion scientist at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And again, I just kind of try, I'm like, James, wow, I haven't talked to him or spoken with, I've only met him once in person. We maybe have had a handful of Zoom calls. Yeah, I mean, he wanted to hire me for something years ago, and I was like, I'm not a right fit, and I like referred him to someone else. But I kind of trusted in that, and I got his phone number from our mutual friend who first connected us, and I texted him, and he was open to meeting. And he's also contemplative in addition to being an emotion scientist. And we've been on this beautiful journey together of trying to figure out what is this phenomenon or prosocial construct? What is tenderness? And we just launched our fourth study. And we actually we're doing a general sample and a contemplative sample to really unpack how do contemplatives experience this phenomenon differently. And, you know, we're in the midst of the research, but an early model of this, when we think about what are the core components of tenderness, we've landed on something called the core four. And the core four are gentleness, genuineness, interconnectedness, and warmth. And so without one of these, it's not tenderness, is sort of our thinking at this point based on the research that you have to have all four of these for it to be tenderness. But what we found from the research is that tenderness, not only does it seem to be, you know, made up of these four components, but what it leads to is increased prosocial behavior. It's correlated with psychological health and well-being, and it also leads to a greater sense of relational gratitude. So, what we've been able to prove from the science is that there's utility, you know, something that we might intuitively know has value. We can now say from the research that there's value to tenderness. Now, in emotion scientists, there's this world of emotions being states and traits. So states are when we feel something in response to a situation, and then traits are when we cultivate something as a way of being. And tenderness, like compassion, like empathy, is both. And I think where I'm at now on my journey is really trying to unpack through my own living lab, and then, you know, we'll test it out with the research. What are the practices that help us cultivate tenderness as a way of being? Because we know it has value now. We've proven that. But now, how do we actually cultivate it as a way of being? So I'll pause there because I could talk forever just about this and see what is coming up for you as I drink my tea.
As you drink your tea, I'll have a sip of water too in a sec. So that's very helpful, and that's exciting research. And I wish you nothing but insight and great opportunity to share that research. Um, I'm reminded of the story that you share in your TED Talk that I think captures what you've just described, the theory behind tenderness, where you're describing like every person can think of someone they love. So let's say if you happen to be a parent, you might think about the tenderness you feel for a child, but you particularly felt the the doors swinging open, I think was the metaphor you used, to sitting beside your son in the hospital at some point when he was being tested for something. And I felt I understood at a much more somatic level what you were describing as tenderness when you use that specific anecdote, because it just
Mm.
allowed us to just deepen the sense of care that we felt, and that tenderness like softens and smooths and glows it all.
Yeah, yeah, the doors to my heart flung open. And I think this brings up an interesting, so, again, we've been on this research journey for a couple of years now, and I feel like there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing with vulnerability and tenderness. And it relates to that state and trait conversation that
Mm,
we just had earlier. Um, so one of the only definitions out there in the literature for tenderness is a response to vulnerability, which is very unidimensional, and our model is multidimensional, or our model in development. We're hoping to have something published by the end of the year in an academic journal. And I feel that those moments, like this is my son, and he was just diagnosed with a rare disease, and it was like, I felt what I had only felt when he was a newborn, like this sense of like just this softening and this deepening. I think that's when I think about what how I experience tenderness somatically, it is like this melting, this softening, this deepening. And it was in response to his this vulnerability.
mm,
And at the same time, when I think about tenderhearted leadership, when we cultivate tenderness as a trait, we can create the conditions for someone to be more vulnerable. Um, and all that is to say, this uh, tenderness, I think, also what makes it unique and why, I think some people who probably might be very curious about our research are going to be compassion researchers, right? Because they're, popularly they might think, oh, well, tenderness is just a facet of compassion. Is it its own thing? And I'll say that, yes, we prove tenderness is its own thing, distinct from compassion, which is another really exciting part of our research journey. Um, because compassion always has to do with suffering, but tenderness doesn't. It
mm,
can. It can do with suffering and it can do with vulnerability, but it can also be when my son laughs. Or one other crazily surprising thing from the research, I'm not a pet owner. Dogs came up so much in the research. I was floored. I was like, wow, we're gonna have to do a whole thing about dogs. Tenderness in dogs. It's really interesting. Um, but I think because we are so not in our bodies, tenderness has the capacity to be this powerful bridge from the heart to the mind, right? Because it is a very somatic experience. Um, and there's also this relationship with time. I don't know if you heard of this term, deep time. It's from Richard Rohr. Um, but it's this sense of like when you are in that tender, it slows things down. And I've noticed when I slow down, then I have more moments of tenderness.
mm.
I'm gonna stop there because again, Anita, you're gonna get me started talking about tenderness. I could talk for like
Well,
hours.
well, it's okay. So I knew we were going to talk about it. I didn't know what we would cover. So let me just ask the questions that I had preemptively put together and see if
Yep.
anything hasn't been covered or anything we want to,
Yeah, yeah,
further
yeah.
uplift. So one is you describe tenderness as embodied, that activates things like empathy, compassion, and vulnerability. I wonder if healing is also a word I would want to add to that list now after the fact I've heard you speak. So my question was like, what can we do to become more embodied? Looks like you're studying that at the individual level and collective level. So maybe you have some early premonitions. Two, how can we cultivate tenderness as a way of being, right? That's something you just already alluded to. And then why does tenderness matter now more than ever?
Yeah. Well, I think I want to start with I'm thinking a lot about what are the barriers? What are the barriers to tenderness? And I think there's a couple. So I'll start with the first being judgment.
Mm,
If you really are in a state of tenderness, you can't be judgmental and tender at the same time. And I know this a lot in my closest family relationships, which is where I'm the most judgmental, which is where I have the most work to do. You know that saying from Rhonda, so you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. I'm like living it right now. I just moved with my parents, close to me, where my husband and I are taking care of three elders right now. Um, so judgment, right? The antidote to judgment is curiosity. Like curiosity can literally melt judgment. But I want to invite us into not this curiosity, but like tender curiosity, that softening. And there's a quote from Mark Nepo that I love that to listen is to be willing to be changed by what we hear.
mm,
And I think about that so much with the tenderness. And another offering comes from my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. Are you sure? Are you sure? So a way to become more tender is to be more curious. And a way to get more curious is just take a breath. Are you sure? When you notice the judgmental mind, like, are you sure? And that in and of itself is so powerful. I think another doorway into tenderness. So when we think about bridging, John Powell talks about three kinds of bridging. There is transactional bridging, transformational bridging, and spiritual bridging. And to really bridge, we have to find a point of emotional proximity. And usually that's, um, it could be shared suffering, but I love the practice of it's a practice very common in a lot of mindfulness traditions of just like me, this person wants to be happy.
mm,
Just like me, this person's struggling through life and trying to get it right. And if we can also just, you know, take a breath and just like me, it's an opportunity to soften, an opportunity to maybe create that emotional proximity. Um, and then another barrier to tenderness is busyness.
mm.
And when we're busy, we're not in our bodies. And I think this is just the modern day conundrum. And even myself, someone who's so dedicated to this path, but who's also in a really intense period of life. I'm 45. I have we had children a little later. I have a young child. I got aging parents. I run this organization. My calendar is very full. And then society, right? All the responsibility, everything with the nuclear family. Um, I feel like is in direct opposition to healing and community and the ways of being that would really support our well-being. And so, that busyness is a barrier because it often takes us out of our body. So I think, finding ways to create structures where we're more present, or even, I coach leaders. I only take on a few every semester, but I've been coaching some assistant principals at a big high school in New York City, and even just supporting them with taking tech habits, like having boundaries around technology. And there's a great book by Catherine Price called How to Break Up with Your Phone. I don't know if you've heard of it, but these devices really pull us away, and they take us away from presence. And one of the exercises in this book, How to Break Up with Your Phone, is like writing a breakup letter to your phone. It doesn't mean you're never going to use your phone, but it's like, how can you have a skillful relationship with this technology? And I really think that that is, that's a barrier. That's a barrier to tenderness, a barrier to being together. And there are beautiful ways of using technology to be tender. I just started responding, and it's not for everyone, but I do voice notes for people instead of doing text as sort of a way to connect. So a little love message to folks. Um, so yeah, the judgment, the busyness, and that also connects with what I was speaking about earlier around time, that there's this relationship between tenderness and time. And I notice that when I'm moving at a slower pace, I'm like automatically more tender. And so I'll just pause there. I don't know if there's another question. There might have been more questions than what you asked earlier, but
I think
yeah.
that's a beautiful place to leave it. And you know, you've commented on technology and all the conversations around AI and what that's going to mean for us. I've had lots of really interesting conversations about the possibilities that can be opened up by AI doing the cognitive stuff, and that humans, you know, sort
Yeah.
of Homo sapiens, we can become Homo sentients and really sort of like lean
Mm,
into our feeling capacities and intuition. I think there's a role for your research around tenderness to have a big take up some space in that AI conversation, because I don't think machines will ever be tender. They
mm,
can be programmed to respond in empathic ways. You know, I think that there's a use for that depending on the circumstances. You don't want people who are at a
yeah.
call center to be yelled at nonstop when an AI can, you know, just blow that off and de-escalate in really kind of
Yeah.
very beautiful ways. But I believe, and I don't want to assume, but I would guess that you believe machines will never be able to be tender
Yeah. I
and
mean,
elicit tenderness.
yeah, I feel that, there's this touch quality when I think about the pandemic and I think about tenderness, that there is something very tactile about it too. And obviously it's also something we can experience, like we feel it and tell, right? Those marinette, like how many times have you had been teary-eyed at one of our Wednesday sessions, right? That you've softened, that you've melted. So not to say that technology limits, our ability to be tender. I think there's possibilities there, but there is also something around the physicalness of it all. And and one other thing I wanted to say just about tenderness and its relation to some other, prosocial emotions like compassion and empathy, that I feel like there's a powerful relationship. Like it's my theory that tenderness can like activate, ignite, and deepen. Like it creates this somatic presence within empathy and within compassion. And it's something I'm still trying to figure out, which is exciting. It's exciting when you're on this journey of like, what is this? What is this exactly? But when we started the call, I mentioned I'm in the middle of this great transition of really shifting my life to be living an intentional community. And I think part of that is definitely, I mean, none of this is calculated, but I think it's part of the tenderness journey, because I think there's something about the in-person community that is going to become increasingly more important as things unfold in our world,
Mhm.
really, really finding those spaces for in-person community and connection. And I also see with my son too, that yeah, I mean the iPad, one of the reasons why I pulled him out of the school he was in was because in kindergarten they're doing reading and math instruction all on the iPad. And what's good is the teacher can tell me his level, where he's at, but is he getting that tenderness?
Mhm.
Not through that iPad. No way.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm curious to know in a year from now whether or not you'll have a feeling of culture shock going outside the community to like the pace of life and just be
Oh,
disconnected, I
yeah. Well,
imagine.
I still, I that. moving, having living in intentional community, but I'm still very much in the world. And I think
Mm.
that's part of my identity as an engaged Buddhist, that my practice has never been to live in the cave. I actually had an astrologer when I was in my early 20s I was like, I just want to be a hermit. And he was like, Meena, I could be real with you. There's gonna be a party happening in the cave if you want to live in the cave. So just embrace your destiny as a more engaged public facing person. And um, and even the tradition I'm in, it's very much about, engagement with the world, and everything we do in Tell is the inner in service of the outer. That really is the crux of what Tell is about.
Beautiful segue then. So you're
Yeah.
the executive director of TEL, Transformative Educational Leadership, which of course is how we know each other. I'm a proud fellow of TEL. And I'm taking this off the website. TEL cultivates the inner and outer growth of educational leaders and deepens their capacity to transform their school communities so that everyone thrives. So a couple of questions here. I'd love for you to contextualize. I want to contextualize this TEL series. Okay, so we're doing this whole series with TEL fellows talking about empathy in education. So I'd love to know more about the fellowship at a high level, sort of the theory of
Yeah.
change of TEL. And then I'll ask it now so that you know that it's coming. What role you believe empathy plays in our inner and outer growth? And what does it
Mhm.
play in education? So lots to unpack.
Yeah. Well, I was a former public school administrator. I was worked in Belly of the Beast in Oakland Unified School District for many years in partnership with the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning to implement social and emotional learning system-wide. And what I saw, boots on the ground, is that you could have all the training in the world, all the curriculum in the world, even have teachers who are embodying social and emotional learning and doing evidence-based instruction. But if you didn't have leadership that really embodied emotional intelligence and had an equity consciousness, then implementation was ultimately shallow and not effective and not sustainable. And so when my colleagues, Linda's really a longtime mentor of mine, and my colleague Daniel Reckstoffen reached out to me with this idea, and I'll never forget, it was November 2017, and we had this early morning call before I was make my commute to Oakland, and we're like, what is this thing called? And we're like, transformative education. We're like, tell. And it was it was this kind of this knowing, and I really believe that Tell it's not an organization, it is an organism, which is something my teacher Thich Nhat Hanh says. It's alive, and I feel like everyone who's connected with, but particularly me in my role, I'm in service of this spiritual entity that is alive, that is an organism, and it really rests on the belief that if a school is the unit of change, then we must support leaders in tending to their inner lives. And we have a really broad definition of leaders. It's not just school principals or superintendents, but it's really anyone who is committed to inner transformation in service of outer transformation and that is committed to making change in their context. So you're in higher ed. We have a bunch of folks actually who are working in higher ed in this cohort. But folks who are really committed to this belief that in order to change the outer, we have to change the inner. And that really is the core of what Tell is about. And so it's a year-long intensive fellowship. And the model is we have two in-person retreats, one in the beginning, one in the end, and one virtual retreat in the middle. And then we meet twice monthly. And the first half of the year, we really are studying the principles of nonviolence and emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence. And the second half of the year, we connect with transformative leaders through transformative conversations. But a real foundation of the beloved community are the principles of nonviolence, which really anchors Tell. And in terms of empathy, empathy is everything. Empathy is everything. And when we think about leading with emotional intelligence and having an equity consciousness, empathy is the core of that. You can't be emotionally intelligent if you're not empathetic. How can you actually, there's emotional contagion, right? Emotions are contagious. How can you read the room? How can you make skillful decisions if you're not able to really connect and feel with others and those you serve? And I think, what we ultimately want for young people is to be able to cultivate the skills of empathy as well. And there's the affective empathy, the cognitive empathy, and then the compassionate empathy. And I say that, tell us about all of those, but ultimately the merging of the affective and the cognitive. So we're in that place of compassionate empathy.
Mm, love that. Well, I love being part of this community, which I know is intentionally a beloved community so that we can go off and sort of like, like mushrooms out there,
Yeah.
create more beloved community. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, because my sense of beloved community is there's an understanding, it's sort of in the DNA of a beloved community that there's a spiritual orientation that could be the interbeing, the tenderness, the
Mhm.
empathy, all of those affect things. But then there's also the political orientation of not accepting status quo. We can be more equity centered. We can be more progressive and open up the gates of kindness and inclusion and belonging for more. So I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think about that nexus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, education's the heart of social change, right? Transforming education is how we transform the world. And so there definitely are, um, uh, we have values, right? We have a value orientation. Some may see that as a political orientation. I like to use the word values, but if you are committed to creating a more compassionate and equitable world, empathy, emotional intelligence, right, are fundamental to that. And um, the beloved community really rests on, we call them two wings in Buddhism, but it's like that compassion and wisdom. And everyone there is committed to cultivating their highest embodied practice of compassion and wisdom. And when we stray, we still hold that, but we come back to that. And so, in many ways, our beloved community is supposed to be a practice ground for us to become more intimate with discomfort, to have more discomfort resilience, as Camila Majid would say, which we've definitely had that a lot in Tell, right? And so many places, forgive me, can I use bad words here? Is that okay? I feel like a lot of places that talk about transformation are so surface and are really just putting, whipped cream on shit. And I think when tell, we're not afraid of the shit, and that we recognize that, no mud, no lotus is part of the journey. And, we don't pretend to have it figured out because beloved community is messy. It's a practice ground. It's real. And the hope is through having this experience, which, intentionally is majority leaders of color space, because that's usually not the context that a lot of us are in. And just that in and of itself, um, we often hear the realness that we wouldn't normally hear in other contexts. And I think until there's this aspiration to keep it 100, as we say here in the States, keep it 100. And I think with that authenticity comes depth. And the other important thing about telling, we've been talking a lot about the inner and the outer, but another fundamental belief that is also aligned with the beloved community is transformation happens through community. This is not an individual journey. And when I think about our TEL alumni from the 2018 cohort, and you ask them about TEL, what they'll say to you is it's the people.
Mhm.
It's the people. And many of them are still their soul friends for today. Like some of the most beautiful, lasting soul friendships have emerged through this professional experience because we're also about integration, the personal and the professional, right? The Mobius strip. And so the people who come to tell, I really feel they're called by tell. They're called by this spiritual entity that tell is, and they're being called on this journey for the highest good of all, for their highest good and for the highest good of who they serve. And um, it's not going to be easy because what doesn't, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you.
Mm,
Um, but as part of the journey that we're all on together. And I've also evolved and grown so much um, through this experience, and I'm profoundly grateful to be on the Tell journey because every fellowship, I'm going through a transformation too.
mm,
Um, and if it didn't transform me as a facilitator, then it wouldn't be a transformational organism. Uh,
mhm,
yeah.
mhm. And everybody who's listening and watching to this point, you've got to continue with the series because I tell you, I've done 9 out of the 12 interviews already, and they're extraordinary. You're in for such a treat. So I want to fit in a penultimate question. I was going to go
Yeah.
to the last one
Mhm.
of the podcast, but I just and not to taint sort of the tender feeling that we're
Mhm.
having on
Yeah.
this call, I can't avoid thinking about the context in which
Yeah.
education right now is being, I don't know what word to use.
Salted, decimated.
Yeah. So right? I mean, when you talk
Yeah.
about you need to have the leadership that
Yeah.
will appreciate SEL, emotional learning, and all of that in order for it to be sustainable and not just sort of like check a box. It's being ripped apart right now,
Yeah.
quite by design. I don't know. What words of wisdom or would you like to share to people? Because I imagine a lot of educators are going to join
Yeah.
this series. So what would you like? What words of hope have you got?
A few things. Well, first of all, the current administration, um, in many ways, like I'm a firm believer in sort of like there's this great poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, Call Me by My True Names. And it's really like, there's aspects of all of us that need polishing, right? And You know, I think what we're seeing in the outer are um, the worst reflections of the inner right now. And so for me, I can't discount the fact that, I am part of, I'm not separate of this, right? And so, and Tell is all about, transforming systems, not leaving systems, but transforming systems from within. And so, just to say that um, all that this is bringing up is it's like we're seeing all the shit that's been there that we may have been not seeing earlier is now coming to the forefront. And so that's not, I mean, it's horrible, but it's also an important part of the journey and the process. And I also think that there needs to be on some level like of reimagining that can only happen when we're rocked. And we're in the state of being rocked right now. And in order to navigate this place of just being rocked, like we got to cultivate our internal resources. We got to find our people. We got to do it in community. And um, I haven't lost hope. I haven't lost faith. Things are hard. I feel heartbreak. I feel sadness. And the other thing about tenderness I want to really communicate is like tenderness is not like good or bad. Tenderness actually helps us not be numb.
Mm,
Tenderness helps us not check out. Tenderness helps us hold the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. And if we are going to transform education, we have to be with the pain and suffering too and really see it and really feel it. And that's hard. But if we don't do that, we're just going to keep putting whipped cream on shit. Let's stop putting whipped cream on shit, Anita. This is part of the process.
100%. That might actually be the soundbite of the short.
I know I don't think I like occasionally sometimes there's only certain language that can communicate what you're trying to say.
100%, 100%. So, Meena, oh my gosh, I have loved this dialogue. Thank you so much for making the time. I love ending a podcast about empathy by asking all my guests to share a moment in their life when they were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant. So, what that meant for you.
Wow. It's so interesting because I was just having a conversation about this, how I'm so used to like the offering and how I need to grow my capacity to receive. And this move I'm making to be an intentional community, I think is part of that, of like up leveling my frequency to be able to receive. Um, I think also as a woman of color, as a daughter of immigrants, I'm like so used to being like the make it so person and like everyone's got to count on me. And I want to lift up a couple moments. I want to say one is like with our team, our TEL team is phenomenal. And, I hadn't missed a TEL session since 2018. And I missed my first session when my mom was in the hospital in April. And like the next morning, I got like this text and it was like, your team, your beloved team has given you a DoorDash gift card for meals. And I was like, just like started getting teary-eyed of like, oh my gosh, like, this part of my suffering is the narrative that I have to do it alone. And like that's a journey I'm on too. Like I want to stop. We were talking, pre-pod. I was like, I want to transition from being like born working mom into the matriarch who's like supported. And I think part of that too is like just my own, as I get older, my own journey that I'm on. Um, and another moment, like really recently, has been with, um, the relationship I have with the monastery that our family is going to be moving to the foothills of to be an intentional community, and the monastics and the abbot and kind of the vice abbot there, who their embodied presence, the empathy they exude, it kind of creates a field and a frequency where I'm with them. I just soften and I just cry, and I am just held because I know I'm in this non-judgmental space.
Mm.
Um, and they are offering up their full presence. And I feel so much grace and so much profound gratitude um, to have both my beloved TEL community, which meets in person but is also virtual, but I also that I'm have an in-person community that is vibrant and strong and deep, and to be held by both. What a gift. I'm like, I must have done so much good in my last lives to be in this moment to have community in the way that I do in this life. And that's my greatest wish for everyone, is that everyone can be held by community.
Mm, And what comes to me, I know in Canada we pronounce the Z Z.
Mm,
So what comes up for me is the ZT, the zone of tenderness. I feel like
mm,
that's what you're
mm.
moving towards.
Oh,
It's what you're appreciating from the folks that are surrounding you. So I asked
you're
that
one
question
of
because I
them.
what?
Oh, you're one of them. I'm so grateful that we got a chance to meet. And I still remember us talking on the phone a couple years ago, and you were meant to be in this cohort, not the 2023 cohort, and trusting in the divine synchronicity and kind of the karmic unfolding of it all. So you are now in my transglobal pan-spiritual family, and along with the 30 odd other folks in this cohort.
Mina, thank you so much for all that you do and all that you embody. And enjoy the move and the transition. And I look forward to reconnecting with you soon.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you, Anita, and thank you for all the work you do in the world. And I'm so excited for this series on education and all of our amazing,
Amazing.
phenomenal TEL fellows
You're here.
who are going to be in conversation with you. I can't wait.
100%. So subscribe now, and to all those who have been watching and listening, we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
If you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Post the link to your socials and hit the subscribe button now. The world needs more empathy, and you have an important role to play.